Aragorn united the kingdoms of men so they could sit back and watch him solo everybody at the commander table. He's got the monarchy and the king does what he wants. He says your creatures can't block if he attacks. Well, they stand right on his side. Your job is to make sure the crown stays on his head, generate an audience of mostly humans, and strap all the weapons of war to him. Welcome to Giga Chatagorn. 29 cards worth $50 are being added in line with these objectives. That's plenty to get through, so let's start it up with the creature additions. You know how I said an audience of mostly humans? The next two creatures are guilty for bringing those non-human creatures to the table. Third Path Iconoclast will be creating 1/1 soldier artifact creatures whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Monastery Mentor has the same trigger but creates 1/1 monk creature tokens with prowess instead. About 70% of your playable spells are non-creatures, so if these are on the battlefield, you'll without a doubt be able to generate those additional creatures to join the party. Hanweir Militia Captain is next, and he goes from captain to cult leader when you have 4 or more creatures at the beginning of your upkeep. He must be an inspiring cult leader, because at the beginning of your end step he recruits yet another human cleric to his cause. The last creature is Faramir, Prince of Ithilien, that will draw you a card at the end of a target opponent's end step if they do not attack you, or get you 3 1/1 human creature tokens if they do. Besides the inevitable benefit one way or the other, this also gives you room for some politicking, which always brings a fun dynamic to the game. Time to get into sorceries, and the 2 that are going to be added into the deck. The first is the X-White-Blue spell, Dance of the Manse. This will allow you to recur artifacts and non-aura enchantments from your graveyard to the battlefield. A total of X can be recurred, capping at a mana value of X. If X is 6 or more, they come back as 4/4 creatures as well. This next part is super important. You will not be able to attach those equipment to Aragorn if they come back as creatures. So make sure to keep X at 5 or less if you need equipment, which should net you at least 2 pieces. Otherwise, target enchantments. The second sorcery is Open the Armory. This is a 1 and a white tutor that gives you the opportunity to find an aura or equipment from your library, reveal it, and put it in your hand. There are higher value equipment like Stoneforge Masterwork, spoiler alert, but depending on the game state there are other options that may be better, so be sure to be thoughtful when making that choice. 6 instants are being added to the list, and I'm sure you'll find a theme among them. The first one is Argivian Find, that returns an artifact or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. You need ways to get your important gear back after it gets removed from a board wipe, or if it gets targeted, and this is a lovely 1 white way to do it. Negate counters a target non-creature spell. Counterspell counters a spell. Mana Leak does the same, but gives your opponent an out of spending 3 mana to stop the spell from resolving. Stubborn Denial counters a target non-creature spell unless your opponent pays 1. If you own a creature with power 4 or more, like Aragorn, there is no stopping the counter. And Bold Bend, that doesn't counter the spell per se, but lets you redirect it to another legal target, which is way more fun anyway. If you saw the pattern of counter spells, you don't get any cookies. Everybody saw it. Let's be real here. There are 2 reasons for this many counter spells. Firstly, we need Aragorn to resolve, and if your opponents pick up on your game plan, they may be inclined to not let that happen. Secondly, if you do have equipment on the battlefield that gives Aragorn indestructible or hexproof, the attach equipment action itself gives your opponents the opportunity to deal with him before it's too late. Having a counterspell on hand will make sure Aragorn has the equipment he needs and could prove vital. The artifacts are where the real juice is, so let's start sipping. Stoneforge Masterwork is where having all those humans on the board starts to make a big impact. It's cheap to play and equip while ideally giving a gigantic power boost to Aragorn. Conqueror's Flail, when equipped to Aragorn, is a +3/+3 off the bat and stops opponents from playing spells on your turn. While not as strong a mechanic as Hexproof, it could mean one extra turn to attack, which could make all the difference. Hero's Blade gives a creature +3/+2. The best part is that it attaches for free when a legendary creature enters the battlefield. Aragorn happens to be legendary, which makes this piece of equipment a great early game cast before your commander enters the fold, or to have on the battlefield waiting for his re-entrance into the action. Horn of Valhalla has an adventure that can flood your board with creatures. You can follow it up with a piece of equipment that scales with how many creatures you have on the battlefield. This can be a threatening 1-2 punch that gives you plenty of defenders and a big power boon to Aragorn. Sanctuary Blade gives you +2/+0 and protection from the color of your choice. I like this for the flexibility to save Aragorn from removal spells from whatever you deem is the most likely threat at the table. Sigil of Valor only boosts your creature when it attacks alone, but does so massively, granting it +1/+1 for every other creature on the battlefield. The intention of the deck is to have Aragorn fighting all the battles while his people are safe in their beds, and this equipment really drives that home. Swiftfoot boots have Hexproof and Haste, a couple of the best keywords you could hope for. Mithril Coat is a Tales of Middle-earth equipment that you can flash in for 3 colorless and attach for free to a target legendary creature, giving it indestructible while being indestructible itself. A combat trick to give Aragorn indestructible and then sticking around is exactly what I want to see. Two-Handed Axe is another adventure that can be played to give a target creature double strike at instant speed. Depending on how stacked up Aragorn is, that could prove lethal. The equipment side has an attacking creature double its power, which again is a very scary prospect. Kemba's Banner is the final piece of equipment that has the For Mirrodin effect, meaning it comes into play attached to a rebel creature token. The effect is +1/+1 for each creature you control, which should be plenty. This rebel could be your most stalwart defender, or you can re-equip it to Aragorn, whatever floats your boat. If you've seen some of my Hosts of Mordor videos, I am not a big fan of Everflowing Chalice in that deck. But I do like it here because that colorless mana can be used on all of these artifacts and for the equip cost. Horn of Gondor is the final artifact addition, creating a human creature token on entry to the battlefield that has a 3 mana tap ability, doubling the amount of humans you control. This can get out of hand incredibly quickly when paired with equipment like Sigil of Valor. On to enchantments with 5 additions. Forge Anew is the first one, and is among the greatest gifts to equipment decks from the Tales of Middle-earth set, period. On ETB, a piece of equipment can be brought back from the graveyard to the battlefield. Equipping can be done at instant speed on your turn, and the first time you equip a creature, it's free. I cannot give this spell enough praise. You want this in your decks, especially when you have ways to recur it out of the graveyard, like this one does. Hannah's Custody is keeping your artifacts safe by not letting your opponents target them. The equipment are a pretty integral part of the deck, so you might as well keep them safe. The Saga, Restoration of Eiganjo, is the next enchantment. The first chapter, you get a Plains from your library to put in your hand. The second chapter lets you play a permanent card from your graveyard with mana value 2 or less onto the battlefield after you discard a card. This essentially functions as either some ramp, which is nice, or a free spell, which is nice. The third chapter has it flip into a vigilant creature that creates more creatures when it attacks or blocks. Angelic Exaltation gives a creature you control +X/+X, where X is the total number of creatures you control when the creature attacks alone, which is the preferred method of Aragorn in this deck. Court of Grace is the last enchantment that makes you the monarch on ETB and creates creatures on each of your upkeeps, a 1/1 spirit or a 4/4 flying angel if you're the monarch. Lands are the last type, with Buried Ruin, Mystic Monastery, and Slayer's Stronghold entering the fold. Buried Ruin taps for a colorless and adds yet another way to recur artifacts, probably equipment, from your graveyard. Mystic Monastery comes in tapped but will give you access to all of the colors in the deck. Enslayer's Stronghold also taps for a colorless mana, but can give a target creature Vigilance and Haste. Aragorn already has Vigilance, but I think the 2 mana cost to haste him in certain scenarios warrant the addition here. As a TLDR, the goal of the deck is to play permanents that will passively create more and more creatures. As your battlefield grows, you will be playing equipment and spells that enable those equipment. And when you are ready to pull the trigger, become Monarch when playing Aragorn. Keep him protected with counter magics and equipment keywords like Hexproof to then begin your unblockable assault. Plans never go exactly as planned, but in a perfect world, Aragorn will be one-shotting your opponents, and with his lifelink and your roster of ideally untapped creatures, you'll be able to make it to all of your next turns, where you can one-shot whoever dared to step up to Giga Chatagorn. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Check out the deck list in the description below, where you can find the suggested spells to remove as well as dozens of spells that were considered to go into the deck. And be on the lookout every Friday for some new brews.